Hey guys, so we are past the midpoint of summer and my tomatoes are starting to show some signs of heat stress and some diseases are trying to move in. Also, insects are starting to become a problem. But I've got a product that you'll have in almost every medicine cabinet that you can add to your tomatoes, but not only tomatoes, but cucumber, squash, and a few other items in the garden that I add it to, and it really boosts the health of these. So I always do this in the middle of summer, but I also do it at the beginning of summer in a little bit different way. So we're going to head into the greenhouse and I'll show you exactly how to put this together and over 20 different points of why this will work in your garden and how it will work in your garden. So let's head into the greenhouse. Now, as I said, everyone has, or almost everyone has this in their medicine cabinet unless they're allergic to it. And it's one of the most common things and one of the oldest medications for humans around. It actually goes back to Native Americans that I know of that use the bark of the dogwood tree, but now it's just in a very convenient form. But you could probably get the same results from using the bark boiled in water from the dogwood tree. But it is the common aspirin or acetylsalicylic acid. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, but that's the best I can do. But anyways, I'm going to show you how to use this in your garden and two things I add to it to make it work. But I'm good, like I said earlier, I'm going to go through 20 plus ways that this will help your garden. But acetylsalicylic acid, please write in the comments how exactly to pronounce this, because I get tongue-tied every time I try to say it. I just say aspirin. But anyways, let's go through the steps of how to use this in your garden and why it's so important. Now, this is a pretty common thing throughout YouTube. I've seen a lot of people talking about it, but I do a couple of things a little bit differently. I use uncoated aspirin, no flavoring enhancements or anything like that. You just want it to be pure 325 milligram common aspirin, uncoated, as I just said. But what I do, a lot of people talk about adding one of these 325 milligrams to a gallon of water. I actually add two. You've got to crush this. Now, I've tried it both ways of what I'm about to say. I've tried it just plainly crushed and mixed into the water, and I've crushed it up and boiled it in water just for like maybe 60 seconds and then added it to cool water. But I think it just works better, just ground up, put it directly in the water and mix it well. But I've got two additives I'm going to talk about as well. But this will help prevent diseases in your plants, and it will stimulate the growth of the plants, and it will actually cause a reaction in the plant that helps its health overall. Now, the way this works in its most basic way to say it is it activates its natural defense mechanisms in the plant, specifically tomatoes, and I believe it does the same thing in squash, cucumbers, and a few other vegetables I have in the garden. So I've added it to almost everything in the garden and never found any problems, including sweet potatoes and carrots, and I believe I added it to radishes. So it has not harmed any plant that I've put it on, and I've only seen positive results. So it does increase its natural defense mechanism. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take two aspirin, uncoated, and add them. I don't have my mortar and pestle. I believe that's how you pronounce it. I know that I caught a lot of grief last time when I mispronounced it. But anyways, I'm just going to take a screwdriver because I don't want to make a trip all the way back into the kitchen. And I'm going to crush this down into a powder. And so, like I said, I'm using two of these, and I'm just making sure I get it completely into a fine powder. I don't want any large parts in it because I want it to completely dissolve in our gallon-sized container. So, and like I said, I'm going to add two things that I don't hear many people talk about, but there we have it. I'm going to do a little bit more crushing there because I don't think it's quite finely crushed. So that's ready to go into our gallon of water, and we'll mix it thoroughly. You want to stir it quite well. Now, as I said, I'm using two aspirin, and most people that I've heard talk about this formulation, they're only using one aspirin, but I like to use two. Like I said, no ill effects yet. And so I would do it if you have a lot of plants in your garden. Just do a test on one plant, wait 5 to 7 days and see how it reacts. But as of this year, I've had nothing but success using this, and it really boosts the health of the tomatoes. I do it early in the year, and then I go back again in the middle of summer, which is right now, and do it again because I want to keep the plant as healthy as possible and keep the disease at bay. And that's what I'm starting to see, is a little bit of diseases popping up in my tomatoes. So I'm going to go throughout the garden and use this formulation. Towards the end of the video, I'll tell you about the two extra additives and why I'm using them and how to add it to your mixture. And make sure you stir it thoroughly because you want it well mixed. And I want to talk about the soil itself in your garden, because this formula is going to work best in neutral to slightly acidic soil. I would say 6.0 to 7.0. So you have that little bit of acidic soil all the way up to neutral at 7. So what I would say is doing test kits are great if you want to do that, but I think you get a great reading from a device like this, and it's a pH monitor. I'll put one in the link. I'll link one down below in the description. But I've been using this. This is my second, maybe my third one I've had, and it's a great way to do it. It's super fast, but you want to make sure that you test the pH of your soil. You want that 6.0 to 7.0 for this to work at its optimum point. So just remember, that's an important fact, is making sure your soil is in the right condition. Now, timing is really important as well on applying this to your plants, whether it's tomato, squash, cucumbers, eggplant. I think that you want to do this early in the morning before the sun tips over the horizon, before 8 a.m. or maybe at 8 a.m. and also late afternoon after the sun has started to go over the horizon, where you don't have the possibility of leaf scorch when you add this. I don't think it's going to be a big deal if you do it in the middle of the day, but you just kind of reduce the chances of any issues. The other thing I want to talk about is seasonal timing. The time of year you're doing this, you're going to do it at the beginning of the year and then midsummer, as I said. But there's a third time you can do it, is during times of stress on your vegetables, such as drought, extreme heat, and that can help as well. But you want to make sure that if it is a drought time and extreme heat, you might want to just only water, not do a foliar feeding, but only water at the base of the plant. Now, there's two application methods to doing this. You can do it foliar feeding or drenching the soil. Now, foliar feeding, I would probably back off to 1 aspirin and make sure that you don't have a negative reaction to it. I don't think you will, but it's just a good precautionary thing to try 1 aspirin in the mixture and wait about adding the 2 additives and see how that one of many plants reacts to it. If you have, let's say, 6 or 7 tomato plants, just try it on one of the same variety and see what happens. But that's one thing that's really important, is making sure that you do a test plant before you do the entire garden. Now, this question always comes up from people I tell about this solution, is how often do you do it? And I mentioned that earlier, at the beginning of the season, mid-season. I wouldn't do it more frequently than once a month, because it could lead to some toxicity in the soil and in the plant. So just at maximum once per month. But like I said, I'm doing this early in the season at the time of planting or right after it's planted, and then once again in the middle of summer, maybe after July 4th. But there's another time you can do it, is if you have really too much rain. That might help as well, because that's when diseases are going to start popping up in your tomatoes and other plants. So if you're getting a lot of rain during the summer, maybe you'll switch it up to going once a month to keep diseases at bay. Now, in Zone 7A, we have a massive insect population. They don't truly die in huge numbers during the winter, because our winters are very mild, and sometimes on a warm week, you'll see lots of insects even in the middle of November, December. But what I do is I use neem oil to help keep them down. It's a completely organic way to keep your garden levels of insects a little bit lower. It's not going to kill every insect in the garden, because it's just not extremely toxic, but it will work. But what I do when I do this, I don't do the aspirin treatment on the same day as I do the neem oil. I give it about a 24-hour window in between each. So do your aspirin spray, wait 24 hours, and then you can come back and do a neem treatment. So it's aspirin first and then neem. They both help. This helps with diseases more. This helps with insects more. So that's one of the things that I like to do, is I like to try to keep it organic as possible. Now, another thing that's really important to learn to recognize in your garden is the signs of plant stress. If you see wilting, if you see yellowing of leaves, that probably means there is a disease in the soil, or possibly your plant is just getting too much heat, too much sunlight, and there's some things you can't control. But if you do see that wilting and yellowing, that's when you want to try to do the aspirin treatment. And also you can do the 2 additives I'll talk about in just a second. But the aspirin treatment is extremely important for helping the immune system of the plant, boosting that so it won't have a problem, because once it gets past a certain point, your plant may not be able to recover. Now, at the beginning of the season, if you're starting your plants with seeds and you're not buying them store-bought already in seedling form, if you're doing it from seed, it's a good idea to take 1 aspirin, mix it in a gallon of water, and let your seeds soak for 24 hours, and that will help boost its resistance to specific diseases in the garden. So that's one thing I did this year, and it really seemed to help my cucumbers. I have to say that I've never seen the cucumbers so healthy as they've been this year, because I did that one trick at the beginning of the season. Normally I buy my cucumbers already started, but this year I decided to start from seeds, and it really worked well. Now, I've got a video upcoming about brewing compost tea, and one thing that is really critical to do is to add 1 aspirin to each gallon of your compost tea, and that can really boost its effectiveness. So that's one of those things, that video is coming up, but I've got so many things going. There's a list a mile long. So that's one thing. If you're doing composting tea, add 1 aspirin to anywhere from 1 to 2 gallons. Now, although I'm talking about vegetables today, previously, earlier in the year, early part of summer, I've transplanted a rose of Sharon, and it nearly killed one. So the second one that I transplanted, I dropped an aspirin into the planting hole to see what would happen. And that second rose of Sharon did extremely well as compared to the one that did not have the aspirin. Now, that's not really a scientific test, but I've read many times that adding an aspirin to the planting hole, if you're doing transplants, such as you're transplanting vegetables or flowers or whatever it is you're planting, in that same hole, just put an aspirin at the top, right where the roots come in, so they can come in contact, and it can boost the health of the plant. So a lot of people are maybe skeptical of what this is or why it works, but it's actually a proven thing in the scientific world. Systemic acquired resistance is what aspirin does for your plant. It helps boost the plant when it's growing initially, and helps it over the entire growing season have more resistance to diseases. So that's why this works. SAR is what it's called, and you can look it up. It's pretty well known. Now, one of the most common things that almost every gardener encounters is powdery mildew, and there's other bacterial infections as well. But doing the 1 aspirin trick in a spray bottle, and I'll show you, I have a solo spray. I talk about them all the time. I think I have 5 of them around the greenhouse, but I'll put a link to one in the description. But the solo sprayer is a great sprayer because you can adjust the nozzle. You can spray from underneath, and that's where sometimes powdery mildew start, is underneath. But that's one of the things that will help with is different diseases such as powdery mildew. Now, this is the solar sprayer I mentioned. Is you can turn it up like that and spray from underside. You can spray over the leaves, and I've had many of these. I use them for different reasons in the garden, so I don't want to mix different chemicals, and sometimes I'll write on there exactly what I use it for, and I won't use anything else in it just in case there's some residue left in the container. But that's one of the things that I really like to use, is these little solo sprayers, that I can walk around the garden and just examine what's happening, and then hit it with the aspirin spray if needed. Now, although the aspirin is not a direct pest control, I feel it's an indirect pest control, because when you use this on your tomato, squash, whatever you're planting, it helps boost the plant's immunity, and it can help fight off attacks from insects. So indirectly, it can help with pest control. And as I said earlier, I kind of mix up with neem oil to help keep this a completely organic garden as much as possible. So that's one thing that you're really doing indirectly, is you're helping cut back on the pests that might attack and damage your plants. The vegetable that is the most responsive to the aspirin treatment is the tomato, and it helps with the disease, as I said, but it also helps boost the fruiting of the tomato plant, so you can have more healthy fruits and they can grow faster. And although everyone speaks of this for tomatoes, it's also good for rooting vegetables. Now, I like to use it on sweet potatoes and carrots and things like that. So you're not just limited to tomatoes, cucumbers, squash. You can do rooting vegetables as well. And the way I use that is I do a soil drench method. I just drench the soil, and not so much on the leaves. I just give each one's planted, I drench the soil to help diseases that might be in the soil. Now, if you're growing leaf vegetables such as spinach or lettuces, you can use this to help with spot leaf diseases. I would say cut back to half an aspirin per gallon and do a foliar spray on them to help cut down those, and only do that about once a month. As I said before, I try to not do this more than once a month, because I'm afraid it might have some negative effects. So with tomatoes, that's fine. You can do a little bit heavier treatments, but with things that you're going to be consuming directly like leaves, I think that just once a month is fine. Now, this can also help with peppers and eggplants. It can help the fruit set. If you do it early in the season, just do a light foliar spray, and that will help with the amount of fruit you get later on in the season by using this method. All of these treatments with aspirin really benefit in humid environments like where I'm at in 7A, and it gets extremely humid in the early part of summer, and it goes all the way through the end of September. So I'd say that this aspirin concoction will definitely help when you're living in a humid environment in the deep south, Florida, and any areas like that. If you're in a dry environment, you may not see as much of a result if you're in an arid type of desert environment, but if you're where I'm at, it definitely will help with diseases that pop up during the year. So another thing you need to adjust is your watering schedule. When you do this treatment, wait 24 to maybe 36 hours before you water again once you do the acid treatment. You want the plant to have a chance to absorb it in the root system and in the foliar areas of the plant. So just remember, give it that day to day and a half to allow it to completely absorb this formulation. Now, one of the best things I can tell you about keeping track of this is if I write something down, sometimes I lose the note, the post-it note, the piece of paper. So just tell your phone to remind you in 30 days to reapply the aspirin to whatever plant you're doing, and your phone will never forget to do that. I've found that that is the best way to do it. I used to keep written records of everything, and it just got very confusing. So when your phone pops up that notification, you'll know exactly when to reapply your aspirin solution. So I've heard in the past that some people are actually allergic to aspirin, and if you are, then handling this without gloves and possibly breathing some of the aspirin residue as you're grinding it up, it may not be a good idea to do it. I don't think that putting the aspirin on the foliar, the leaves parts of the plants or at the root system, I don't think it's going to end up in the tomato, but if you have a very, very severe allergic reaction to aspirin, I would just say forego this and just maybe use something else that's less toxic to you. Now, if you do see some yellowing or leaf burn or some signs of toxicity in whatever plant that you're growing, you can take the aspirin and divide it in half and divide it in half again and do those tests again. Wait several weeks before you do it again. But that way you can know if the plant is sensitive to aspirin, just cut back on the amount by half or 1 to 1/4. Now, I was reading in one of my garden magazines that said that doing this soil drenching can actually positively improve the microbial life in the soil. So it's not like you're doing anything that's going to harm the soil, but you just want to keep the concentrations at a level that's safe for that particular plant. Now, as I said earlier, there's 2 other additives that I sometimes add, and it just depends on what I think the garden needs. If I think that it's a low nitrogen problem, I'll add ammonia to it, and I usually will add 1 tablespoon to possibly 2 tablespoons per gallon of water before I do the watering and mix it well. The other thing I add is eggshells. I keep a lot of eggshells because I eat a lot of eggs. I take them, I put them in a very strong blender and produce them into a powder. And so this is an extremely fine powder. It's just like baby powder, but it's made from eggshells. It's amazing the first time I did this that it took eggshells and turned them into a powder. I also put one of these silica packets in there to make sure it stays dry. You don't want this egg powder to become moist and clumpy and it would lose its effectiveness. So I would say on the egg powder, I would say 1 tablespoon per gallon, mix it well, and then you can do your soil drenching and even the foliar feeding. That will add a lot of calcium to it. So guys, if you do decide to use this specifically on tomatoes, you'll see your tomatoes just from the aspirin, not from the ammonia or the eggshells. But if you just do the aspirin, you'll see the leaves green up and become almost a little thicker. So it's amazing how well this works. It does that SAR response, and it makes your tomatoes a little bit more bulletproof than if they were just out there without any protection from the diseases, funguses, and bacteria that are floating around in your garden. So I've got a video that specifically talked about a magic garden recipe, and of course there's no such thing as magic. I don't believe there is. But anyways, it involves eggshells. I'll put that video link right here so you can take a look at it. But it has gotten almost 1 million views, and it seems to be a very popular video among all my libraries. So take a look at that, and you might learn something new about using eggshells in the garden. So guys, I want to say thanks so much for watching. I hope you'll like and subscribe, and happy gardening. Have a great day.